If you lived in the Middle Ages, you'd probably already be dead. But if you survived long enough, you might be accused of something far worse than crime or treason. You might be accused of being a witch, and here's the scary part. You didn't need to cast spells or fly on broomsticks sometimes. You just needed to have a bad hair day or a curious mind. So today, we're diving into 10 shockingly real reasons you would have been called a witch in the Middle Ages. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll realize almost every one of us would have been burned at the stake. Let's start with reason number. You knew too much about nature. In medieval villages, medicine was superstition, not science. If you knew which herbs helped with pain, or which plants could stop a fever, congratulations. You were a witch. People back then didn't understand biology or chemistry, so a woman mixing herbs to heal people looked like sorcery. There's a recorded case in England where a woman who cured headaches using rosemary and willow bark was drowned for witchcraft. Today, she'd be a pharmacist. Back then, she was a servant of the devil. You were too beautiful or too ugly. This one's brutal. If you were too beautiful, men said you used witchcraft to seduce them. If you were too ugly, they said you made a deal with the devil to curse others. You couldn't win. The church and society saw women as either temptresses or monsters, both dangerous. Beauty was feared, and fear was enough to get you tied to a stake. Imagine, today's makeup tutorial could have gotten you executed. You talk to your cat, have a pet cat, you'd be done for. Cats, especially black ones, were believed to be the devil's messengers. If anyone saw you feeding one or talking to it, they'd whisper, "She's talking to her familiar spirit." During the witch trials, thousands of innocent women were killed simply for owning cats. Ironically, without cats, rats spread disease, including the Black Plague that wiped out millions. So yes, cats could have saved lives, but in the Middle Ages, they got their owners killed. You were left-handed. Left-handedness was once called the mark of the devil. If you wrote or worked with your left hand, people thought you were cursed. Even the Latin word for left, sinistra, gave us the modern word sinister. Today, being left-handed means you're creative. Back then, it meant you might be burned alive. So yeah, high five with your left hand and then boom, witchcraft. You lived alone. In the Middle Ages, independence was suspicious, especially for women. A woman who lived alone, without a husband or family, was seen as unnatural. If your crops grew better than others, or if your chickens didn't die in winter and they'd say you were casting spells, it didn't matter if you just worked harder. People feared what they couldn't explain, and fear always needed a scapegoat. That scapegoat was the witch next door. You had a birthmark or freckles. Imagine this, a birthmark on your arm. To us, it's just skin. To them, it was the devil's kiss. Witch hunters actually searched for witch marks, freckles, scars, moles, and used them as proof you'd made a pact with Satan. They even poked those marks with needles. If you didn't bleed or scream, they said the devil was protecting you. No matter what happened, you'd lose. You were too smart. Knowledge was dangerous. If you could read, write, or question religious ideas, you were a threat. Curiosity was rebellion, and rebellion was witchcraft. During the Inquisition, owning certain books could get you tortured, and women who studied science or philosophy, labeled witches or heretics. Imagine being arrested for reading a psychology book. Today, that's how extreme it was. You had mental health issues. Depression, anxiety, epilepsy, none of these were understood. If someone screamed during a seizure or talked to themselves during depression, villagers thought they were possessed. Instead of therapy or medicine, the solution was execution. In one French town, a man was burned alive after having a panic attack in church. People thought he was summoning demons. We call it mental illness. They called it witchcraft. You predicted the weather. You know how some people can just feel when rain's coming? In the Middle Ages, that was sorcery. Farmers relied on weather for survival. So if someone said, "Looks like rain tomorrow," and it actually rained, they'd assume you caused it. Rain meant magic. Drought meant curses. Either way, you'd be blamed. when someone just didn't like you. And finally, the saddest reason of all. Many witch accusations had nothing to do with witchcraft. If a neighbor hated you, if someone envied your land, or if your husband wanted to remarry, they could accuse you. And that was enough. Trials didn't need proof, just gossip and fear. Thousands of innocent people, mostly women, were tortured and burned based on rumors. So, would you have been called a witch in the Middle Ages? If you love science, have a cat, are left-handed, or simply think for yourself, then yes, absolutely. But here's the twist. The witch trials weren't just about witches, they were about fear of difference. The same fear that still exists today when people are judged for being too different. So the next time you hear the word witch, remember, it once meant someone who dared to think differently. If you found this story fascinating, hit like. It tells YouTube this story matters. Subscribe for more deep dives into the dark corners of human history and psychology. And remember, the real magic is knowledge.